Okay, so now I'll explain the Gemara part that we did. So we start here, Nun Hey Amud Beis. Hakoines, so in the air, is somebody, Hakoines means enters literally, but here in this case means brings. Hakoines, somebody brings. So in a sheep, la deer to the deer, like comes from the word of dwelling. So ladir in this case is to the barn or wherever the sheep sleeps. Hakonis in ladir vinal bifanea vinal, and he locks. The owner locks bifanea, it inside, bifanea in it. Kiraui, securely, properly. So the Akonis and the now so right, the owner brings the sheep into the barn and he locks the barn well. V'yatza, but the tzon still, but the sheep still v'yatza, it escapes, it goes out. Ve'izika, and it damages. He's putter because he was responsible, right? The owner did what he had to do. He locked it up, but it still escaped. So if we say if the question is why is he putter, he's putter because it's considered like an ones. He did what he was had to do. He locked it up. He was responsible. He wasn't poshea. He wasn't negligent. He did what he had to do, but it still escaped and hizika and then he damaged. So that's not his fault. That's more like an ones. So he's putter. Lo na b'fanea. But if he did not lock it inside properly, v'zika, and it goes out and it damages chayiv. Obviously, he's going to be chayiv because he was poshea. He was negligent. You had to lock up the barn and you didn't. And the sheep escaped. It's your fault. You should have locked it up. Nafretz abalayla, if it escaped in the middle of the night, it made a breach in the middle of the night. Nefretza is a breach. If it made a breach balayla in the night, parts to list him, or if the list him is robbers. If the robbers shifartzua broke it out, or did the breaching, shifartzua list him, or the robbers broke it out. V'yatza v'zika, and it went out and it damaged putter. He's putter. Now I'll explain what that means in a second after the next line, which seems confusing at first. Hoitziyuha listim, but if the listim hoitziyuha bring it out, listim chayavin. The listim are chayiv. So we have two questions here. First of all, what would be the difference? Shepartzua listim then potter. Hoitziu halistim chayiv. Doesn't make sense. Why? Like it seems like it's the same thing. Shipartzua, siyuha. It's they're both on the list and they're both on the robbers. Why would one case be potter, one case be chayiv? The second obvious question here is why in. It seems weird because before it says, right, putter. It just says putter. It doesn't say the Beis is putter. It doesn't say the listim are putter. But then in the next case, I see a listim chayavim. The listim are chayiv. It doesn't say anything about the owner. It says specifically the listim are chayiv, and it made a specification of who is chayiv, and but in the case before, it just says putter. So what's the difference there? So I'll answer the first question first and then the second question. The first question was, once again, what's the difference between Shifartzua listim and Hoitziyuha listim? So Shifartzua, well, we know what technically the difference is. But why, what we're confused about is why is the end outcome different? Why is the halacha different? Right? Shipartua listim means that the listim just basically opened the lock and opened the door. They didn't do anything to the sheep. They opened the lock and opened the door, and right gave it gave the sheep the option to roam around, but it never brought it out. And in the second case, the listim not only opened the door, opened the lock, and opened the door, right? But they also brought the sheep out. But you might think this is not the answer, but you might have thought that the first case, they didn't take it out, so they didn't make the sheep damage. But in the second case, they brought it out and it caused the sheep to damage. But no, in the first, this doesn't make sense because it's not. It doesn't say that the listim, it's you a listim, and made it hizika. You can't make the animal hizika. It doesn't make sense unless you like throw the animal at something. It didn't say that they threw the animal. The listim, even though yes they could have brought it closer, made it come out, right? First of all, the sheep had the option to go back in. First of all, second of all, the sheep didn't have the obligation to damage. It might have not damaged, right? So while you might have thought that's the difference, that's not the reason why there's a different halacha. The reason why there's a different halacha is itziyuha, right? They took it out. When you take something out, you grab it by the leash and take it out. And that's an act of a kinyan. That's an act of accusation, right? Since they are robbing it, now they took ownership of the sheep by taking it out. Those are one of the ways you can acquire something by taking it by the leash and bringing it out. So since they now acquired the sheep, they are now responsible for whatever the sheep damages. Even though it was stolen, right? But in stealing, you could still acquire ownership. So by stealing. So they stole it. Now they acquired ownership because they took it out. In the other case, while they did steal it, since you cannot acquire anything until you do one of the ways of one of the acts of acquisition. And in the first case, right? Shipartzua lisim, they didn't even touch the tzon, it seems like. In the second case, they took it out. By taking it out, they now have ownership and now they're responsible. And obviously this is a case that, you have to have intent to steal. So you might say, what if they didn't have intent, right? Even if they dragged it out and they didn't have intent to acquire it, they just pushed it out, right? And they wanted to rob something else, and they didn't have intent, so then they shouldn't be chayiv. So there was two options for what the case would have to be for it not to be like that, right? What I mean is, if the case is the robbers, right? First of all, one is the obvious answer. It says the robbers, so that means they wanted to rob the sheep. Now you might say robbers. It doesn't say they wanted to rob the sheep. It just says they were robbers, so they could have robbed something else. Now, in this case, since I think it's because since it's out of the owner's knowledge, right? The owner wanted to keep it in the den, in the barn, right? And since they took it out and they without the owner knowing, I think I'm pretty sure that's why they still acquire ownership. But either way, it doesn't matter. I'm just making it more complicated. Whatever, just ignore that. Whatever. The point is that hoitziyuha, they took it out and now they have ownership of and they got ownership of the sheep, so they are responsible for anything that happens to the sheep. But in the first case, shifartzua, they only opened it, right? Okay, so yeah, hoitziyuha, they took it out, so now they have ownership. So that's why they're chayiv. Now the second question is here. Why did it say listim chayavin and before it just says putter? It doesn't say any specification. So so we can make a diuk from that in the first case when it says putter, not only does it mean the owner like it did in the first cases with the hakoines atzoin and now b'faneh, right? Like just like before it means putter for the owner, here too it means putter with the owner, but also since it says listim chayavim in the thing, we can make a diuk, we can make an inference that the putter in shifartua listim yatzav zika putter, the putter there, not only does that mean the owner but also the listim. So putter there means both the owner and the robbers are putter. And then it says, listim chayavin, the listim are chayiv for the second case, and not the owner. Hanicha b'chama, if you left in the sun, or if you gave it over shemasra, gave it over lecheresh to a deaf person. So why does I'll explain after. To lecheresh to a deaf person, shota a retarded person, v'katan or a minor, v'yatzavizika chayiv, and it went out and it damaged chayiv. So those three cheresh, shota, v'katan, those three are considered stupid or not as intelligent, you could say, because right. What you might think, why is a deaf person not intelligent? Because before the cheresh, the deaf person, they didn't know how to teach deaf people very well, so they couldn't learn as well as somebody who could hear. Since they couldn't learn as well, they were more dumb. So the shota, obviously pretty self-explanatory, they're retarded, and the katan and the minor, he's not as intelligent as an older person who's bar mitzvah, right? So those three, even if you gave it over, you gave it over, right? But the thing is, you only were responsible halfway, so you're still poshea because you're responsible, but only halfway because you gave it over to someone to look out, but that person is not qualified to look for it. You gave it to people that are dumb. They're not qualified. So if they damage, then it's your fault. You gave it over to someone that's not qualified, so it's your fault. You were Pershea. So, once again, I'm going to go through very quickly. Once again, what was the reason either putter or chayiv for the owner? Hakon is on the air, and he locks it correctly, putter, because he's responsible. And it was ones, that it was hezek. Lo namav, but if he did not lock it correctly, then he's poshea and he's chayev because he's negligent. Nifetz abalayla shibartu leistem. If the nifetz abalayla, right, it breaks, you locked it correctly, but in nifetz abalayla it went out in the night. Now we still have a question there. Nifetz abalayla, so what? In the day it's not chayev. I mean it's not pater. We didn't answer that question yet, but that's why nifetz abalai. Okay, whatever. But that's besides the point. So nifetz abalai to list zika, right? The robbers, or if it broke out by night without you knowing, it's not your fault. You were responsible, and it's considered onis. So you're putter. You listim chayavin. So he's the owner still putter in this case. So it's you listim because again listim are still considered like basically onis. So in the listim chayav, and we already explained why, because they have ownership. Then he's chayav because it's poshea. If he took it out in the sun, right? The sun case is like this. I didn't explain what it means. Hanicha b'chama means you took it out, right? The place where you left the sheep is in the sun. There's no shade, so you were poshea because you did not give it shade, even though you knew it was a hot day. you left it in the sun, so obviously the sheep is going to try to escape into somebody else's property where they have shade. So the sheep broke into somebody else's property and went to their shade, and it damaged something because of that. So it's your fault because you were poshea and you didn't give the sheep shade on a hot day. It was a hot day. It wasn't like, oh, it was irregular that it went into somewhere else. It was hot. There was a lot of sun, and you didn't give it shade. So obviously it was gonna break in. It's somebody else's thing. So you were poshea, so you're chayiv. And the same thing with giving it over to cheres shota v'kotan. Those people are not qualified to be shomers, so you're chayiv because you're poshea. But if you give it over to a roeh, to a shepherd, so he's very qualified for sheep, nichnas haroeh tachtov, and it even says explicitly nichnas haroeh tachtov, and the roeh nichnas went in, meaning enters hatachtov under you, meaning it goes in your place. Haroeh, right? The shepherd goes in your place, meaning now it is acquiring ownership for the time being. So now the roeh has ownership of the sheep. Nafla lagina, and it fell in lagina venenis, and it had benefit. Mishalenes mashenenis, you pay what benefited. So who pays what nenis? Obviously, it means haroeh, because the roeh now has ownership, not you. You didn't do anything wrong. So since you didn't do anything wrong, obviously you were responsible. So you're pater from any payment. But the roeh, who nichnas haroeh tachtav, went for you. Nafla legina v'nenis mishalamis mashenenis. You pay the roeh pays what the sheep benefited. Yarda kadarka, if it went on his way, v'zika, and it damaged, mishalemes mashe zika, you pay what it damaged. So what's the difference between so first of all, we have to understand why there's a difference between venenis meshlemes mashenenis and yardakadaka vizika meshlemes mashezika. Why is there nenis for the first one, for nafla lagina, and for the second one it's vizika? So for the first one, nafla lagina, it fell. So what does it mean by fell? So the case is that it was like a cliff, right? The sheep, or the farm or whatever is located like next to a cliff. So let me see if I can draw it. So here's your barn, right? Here's your barn with the sheep. Right? Okay, I don't know what kind of sheep that is, but whatever. And then there's a cliff. So it's not normal for a sheep to just jump off. It doesn't make sense. Why would the sheep jump off? So it's irregular. Nafla legina. It fell into the garden. Right? Here's the fruit. Right? It fell into the garden. Somehow it survived. Okay? Somehow. And then he only has to pay what nehenis, what he benefited, because, and now wait, first I will have to explain that nenis is actually less than hizika, because nenis just means what it benefited, it does not mean the value of the things he benefited, because that would be hizika. Because when you eat something, you're damaging it, right? So then it would just say hizika, mashi hizika, but it didn't say that. It said nenis. So what does it mean nenis? Nenis means, right, for a human, if you pay for an apple that is $2, then you benefit $2, right? But for the animal, right, the animal doesn't care what it eats; it just wants to eat. So the benefit is the same. So for a sheep, whether it eats an apple, I mean, there is some difference, so it will change a little bit, but only a certain amount. So to an extent, the the sheep uh, doesn't care so much if it eats an apple, let's say, compared to, I don't know, something that is worth $50. It doesn't care. It's just eating. So even if what the sheep ate is worth $50, it would only have to pay what the sheep normally eats. So it would have to pay for the sheep food, which would be, let's say, $2. While even if it ate $50 worth of food, it doesn't matter. It would only have to pay $2 because, right? It's not really the roa in this case was not poshea either because it fell off the cliff. Nafla lagina, it fell, right? It didn't roam around and then eat. It fell. It was out. It was ones. It was not. It was not the roa's fault. So here, nafla lagina. If it fell into the gina venenis and it benefited mishalametz mashenenis, you pay what the sheep benefited, which means less than the izika. It's less than you pay less because it was onis. But but if it was yarda kedarka, it was going on its way. It went down kedarka on its way. Ve'izika, and it damages. Mishalemetz mashi zika. So now you would have to pay mashi zika. So in this case, the land is all straight or somewhat straight. Okay, so here's a barn once again, and the stupid sheep. So here the sheep just went straight. So that's normal. Kidarka, it's like its way. It's normal. It's regular for the sheep to just roam around. So if the shepherd was not paying attention, it's his fault. He's poshea. So now, in this case, he would have to pay more. Mashi zika, what he damaged. What the animal damaged. So now, let's say this was worth $50, right? $50. So here, up here, benefited was only $2. Here is also benefited $2. Here also the sheep benefited $2, but because it's going on its way, right? There's nothing irregular for a sheep to just walk around. Here there was a cliff, right? It's weird that the sheep would just see a cliff and then jump off. It doesn't make sense. But here the shepherd was negligent because he was not paying attention, or he did not build a fence to protect. So because of that, he just let the sheep go and eat the food. So now he has to pay more. He has to pay the 50. Here it was only $2, but here it's the 50. Because he let the animal roam around and he was negligent. He let it was obvious it was going to go there. There was nothing stopping it. So it wasn't irregular for the sheep to just go to the guy's to the neighbor's field. So it's the shepherd's fault. So now he would have to pay mashi zika, not the mashenenis, which is more. The hizika is more. Okay. Mishlemetz mashi zika. Ketzad mishlemetz mashi zika. How do we evaluate? How do we pay what he damaged? What he damaged? Shemin beis Be'osasade kama haisa yafa v'kama hi yafa. So you evaluate Beisa, the Beisa, be'osasade in that field, kama haisa yafa, and v'kama hi yafa, and how much it is now worth. So what does this mean? So this means, right? Here's the field, right? You have a field, right? And it's split right into like squares. So it's split into squares. So there's so the animal when it roamed around and ate, right? Let's say for each of these squares, there's there's 10 lines of produce. Okay? So there's 10 lines. The animal ate so and each of those 10 lines, right, of produce. So the land the whole one of these things is worth let's say $1,000. Okay, so each row of land is worth 100, right? But the food on it, the food on one row is only worth $20. Okay, the food is worth $20. So there's a couple ways would think you could evaluate this, right? One way of thinking is, right, you pay for what the sheep ate. The sheep ate $20 worth of food, so he pays $20 worth of food. But no, the Gemara says that's not how you evaluate, because then it doesn't make sense, right? That's not the farmer didn't lose out on $20, and I'll explain why. Because the farmer is using land. He's not. If the case was the animal roamed around and ate food that was in a barrel, right? The food was in a barrel, and the animal came and ate the food. And that's different because that's just a barrel full of food. So he's eating the actual food. So each apple would be $2, and he's eating 10 apples, right? So that's different than here that he's eating the 10 apples off the ground. Because here, off the ground, he still has the rest of the row, right? Or let's say it was tomatoes, so it's off the ground, right? He has the tomatoes, right? And the owner still has the land. All he doesn't have is the apples, right? All he doesn't have is the apples. So he still has the land, so he didn't lose $20. Or no, right? The $20 was the price of like food in the store, right? He's not selling store food. He has his land, so you would evaluate the price of a land, not food. So like that's just something extra that it's food. But the farmer was just has land. So because he ate from the land, technically the sheep ruined, so to speak, his land, because before it looked like this, right? Before it looked like this, and now since the sheep came, right? since the sheep came, it looks like this. So there's only plants there now. So a farmer, let's say, would pay. We said the row is worth $100. So this row would be $100. But now with the food cut out, it's still land. It's still very good land. It's just it doesn't have fruit on it. Now it still is more since it still is more in the first case because there's fruit, but it's not as much as $20 because you're not selling fruit, you're selling land. So this is only goes down $10, let's say. So now the land is worth not a 90. So what the Gemara is saying, how we evaluate, is not the food on one row is $20. That's not how you evaluate it. You evaluate the Beisa. You evaluate the Beisa, what it was before, which it would be 1,000, and what it is now, which is since the row is now worth 90, it would be worth 990 now. So before it was 1,000, and now it's 990. So you evaluate the Beisa, what was before, and what it was before, what it is now. So the difference between that is $10. So the shepherd, or maybe in this case it's the owner, would only pay $10. So let's go back to the Gemara, right? How do we evaluate what? How do we pay what he damaged? But also said that you evaluate how much the Beisa is worth in that field. Kama haisa yafa, how much it was worth. Vikama hi yafa, and how much it is worth. So how much it was worth and how much it is worth, and you evaluate the difference, and then you pay that. Rabbi Shimon said, so right, that's a different thing. So right, and the difference between that you pay. So so then the shepherd would have to pay the $10. Rabbi Shimon says, Achla peros, if you ate peros gemurim, full peros, mishalemes peros gemurim, he pays for full peros, full of fruits. Im saw, if it was a saw, if the animal damaged the saw, then he pays a saw. Im sayim, but if the animal damaged sayim 2 saws, then sayim he pays sayim. Right? Im saw. So I'll explain it because it might be a little confusing. Im saw, if saw. So the first saw is if the animal damaged a saw, then the second saw he pays a saw. Im sayim, if the animal damaged sayim, sayim, then you pay sayim. So we didn't explain what the details of peros gemarim, mishlam peros gemarim, or sa. So I'll just leave it with translation for the last 2 lines. Okay, and that's it.